Welcome, welcome to all of those who are here. I actually think that we're mostly assembled as well, so welcome. I'm going to turn off the dinging so that it doesn't bother me. I'm Chris Gorman. I work at the Center for Educational Innovation, and my role there focuses on supporting teaching and learning in STEM disciplines. I'm really excited to be facilitating a number of these discussions about experiential teaching and learning in online spaces. And then today's discussion is part of that series to bring together folks teaching courses to exchange ideas and problem solve. And so today's session is going to be focused on problem solving and programming labs. I'm going to be recording this session and consolidating the notes from both what's verbally presented and then what's also exchanged in the chat. And we're doing this so that we can share all the good ideas and resources more broadly with the university community, and then also that they can be something that you come back to later, especially since about 2/3 of the folks registered from this course or registered for this discussion aren't teaching this summer. So I'm imagining you might come back to this in a month or two. And a big thank you to, I've got JD Walker in today's session, who's going to be helping me monitor the chat and take notes as well. And there he is saying hello. Okay, so as I mentioned, this group teaches things mostly like computer science, statistics, or some kind of computational modeling in a class that's not in those kinds of departments, but is often it looked like the one class in your department that's doing that thing. And then our goals today, as I mentioned, is to share ideas, to problem solve in order to help you as you plan for your courses. And our immediate focus, and the thing that I want to make sure that we don't miss, is supporting those who are teaching this summer. So I know a bunch of you are teaching not this summer, and that is just fine. But I just want to encourage those of you who are to make sure to forward your questions, bring them to the front, and let us problem solve together. And then the structure for this session will be first to hear from Christine Baki, who teaches, is that a correct pronunciation, Christine? Okay, I got a nod there. All of a sudden I realized—
Yes, it is.
I didn't get it. We didn't do a verbal meet. So all of a sudden I was like, ooh, I'm going to be a terrible mispronunciation. So Christine Baki, who teaches online programming courses at our Crookston campus. And then I'm also going to call on Marta Shore, who teaches biostats in the Twin Cities School of Public Health, to tell a little bit about how she approaches an asynchronous version of labs, and then turn it over for discussion to address questions and to kind of gather ideas together. Okay, so the Zoom tools we're going to be using. I'm not going to be sharing my screen the whole time, but you do on the top want to find the participants pane and the chat pane if they're not already open. We're going to use the participants pane because at the bottom of that participants pane is going to be a raise hand button. So if you want to talk, if you can raise your hand just to help with the traffic control here, that would be great. And then you can also just type your questions directly into the chat. You can follow along with the chat and respond to questions there. I'll try to bring most of them into the verbal part of the conversation, because I know monitoring both the verbal conversation and the chat can be pretty overwhelming. And if there are questions, let me know. And then, so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. So hopefully that participants pane is now on the side with the chat underneath, and turn it over first to Christine, and then have Marta share a little bit.
Okay, well, I can't say all my experience has been lovely, but I'm going to share what I have had troubles as well as what's went well. I do want to say right from the beginning, one of the problems that I've had with lab type classes is no matter what I've done, I wish I had several TAs. So if you have any way to get the load for doing what I consider a good lab online increases immensely.
Hey, Christine, just one more thing before you keep going. If everybody could just introduce what that class is that they teach in the chat, then we can just kind of know and connect with one another later as well. And I'll have you do that.
Yeah, and I didn't mention, the two classes I'll be primarily talking about are Java 1 and 2. So it's a programming lab. I have done similar things as well as I've heard and talked about other people that have done. I'm highlighting some things that I do maybe in other classes as well that they like, that I've heard good things from students. So I'll tell you how I do my programming labs, but a lot of things come into play. So let me I only have 10 minutes, so if somebody wants to kind of warn me when I've talked too much, let me know. Let's see, here we go. Share my screen. Now, my goal of this isn't to have a little lecture for you, but to have my notes written out so that I followed along with what I wanted to say. So online programming labs then to do with something like a computer science or an IT like maybe web programming, whichever one. I would run these all the same way or using these things. I do groups. If I can use a Zoom breakout room, it works great. But let's talk about things that I have full control of, because sometimes Zoom has had some problems with like Zoom bombing and stuff lately. And some of those breakout rooms, some things change sometimes. So what I did to create groups is very interesting, I thought, because I had some problems with it when I started. I created a separate Google Calendar, and then I had students in the entire online class sign up for blocks of time because I wanted them to work together. So work groups were one way where the students could connect with one another and could have like a study group even though they weren't meeting face to face. Okay, so I can show you how I did this. I had students put their names in I'll show you my example. I think it explains it even better than my notes to myself. So hang on one second. I know I stopped my share because it opened a window. So be patient here while I'm seeing where that little link option. You do not want to see all the junk I have on my desktop. You're like opening my office up. It just would be horrible. So we'll share it again with you. Know that it's the right thing open. I don't know how cluttered your offices are, but sometimes my documents are pretty rough. So here we go. This is what I had. And originally I had done a Google Calendar. So I need to tell you the bad before I tell you the good. I created a separate calendar on Google and I thought, well, this is great. I'll share this with the class and I'll do this same exercise with the Google Calendar. Everything went well. About a year later, right around finals time, everything started disappearing from my calendar, all of my calendars. And I didn't know what was going on. And a student from that class that I had a year prior and shared this separate Google Calendar I made had found some sort of back door and hacked my Google Calendar, deleted all of my events, all of my meetings, and it was right around finals, the end of the semester. It was not pretty, and trying to get it back wasn't pretty either. I was really grateful for my background in IT because I knew what I needed to do to talk to the right people to get things back. Once they came back, that student got back on again, and I kicked them off of access, got a hold of IT again. It took several times to actually clean that hole up and lock them out. So instead of that, I did something like this. And this is an Excel spreadsheet, except it's on Google Drive, but it's more limited. The access, I have never had a problem with the access on this. Putting it in a folder that's not shared and just the document alone is shared. So the point was, I needed the students to find a time that they could meet together. I did it in 1 hour blocks. I found that the majority of the students complained because my blocks were during the workday. So you'll see that my time frame went all the way to 3 in the morning, and the heavy times for students to sign in were in these times. So how did they make a student group? I've written down on my slides that information, but I'll go over the gist of it here. And I know this is really small, so let me do a little zoom here to get it bigger. Okay, so there's my if and only if. It's the joy of having it large. First, I had them enter their name and email in 3 or more blocks during the week. So this would take a week or 2 weeks to set up your groups. You have to have that time built in there because it's going to take some time. So they put, when they put their name and their email in any of these time slots, other people could too. I had to give them edit rights to this. The number 2 was pretty important. I said, enter your name in blocks, only blocks where you can meet throughout the semester. If you didn't do that, then students that have different schedules every week, that caused a little problems. The first time I tried this too, there were some issues. And so when I emphasized that and they really gave it some time, they were able to decide, okay, these 3 hours throughout the week I could meet, right? Okay, so then my goal wasn't really 3 hours. My goal was up to a 1 hour team meeting, but it gave me enough overlap where everybody overlapped with someone else, at least 1 hour. Then I tasked them, so the first week they were tasked to put the information on, the second week they were tasked to contact people in their blocks and find a group of 3 to 5. And I did task the students with that. So the problem became then only a few students couldn't make those arrangements. And that's where I got involved. And once again, that's where maybe a TA could get involved or something. You're like, well, these people are on the calendar during those times, and here's what you have to do. So I have it written out, if and only if you have difficulty connecting to form a work group. First, you are required to send an email to people during those time blocks. Now, someone would say, I couldn't find anybody during my time blocks. I said, just forward me the email that you sent to them and I'll correspond with them. Well, you often found that they didn't respond back to you because they hadn't reached out to anyone and they were in a group. You know what I'm saying? You know, those people, they're very timid. So once they had to do that and show me that they had done that, they took care of that problem. So that's where, if it didn't work out at all, I could step in. I rarely had to do something once I asked them for the evidence. So when I had these groups here, then I could move forward with my group meetings. So once the work groups are in place, and I needed work groups because I found that with programming online, I got really good reviews from this one. My online students were so happy. In fact, I had some of them that said, you know, I'm a senior online and I have never even met anyone in my classroom really. And so this is amazing. But it was time consuming. So what I did then was I made a requirement. Those groups would meet for at least 5 minutes. They could meet for longer, but I needed a 5-minute recording. And I laid out what I needed them to discuss. So instead of doing an online typed discussion, I basically did a little mini lab group. Now this sounds like maybe a lot of rigmarole, but to make a lab and actually have them do the lab and have people to work with as if it was on campus, after those 2 weeks, I found that they loved it. And it wasn't really as much as just getting it set up. So the 5-minute submission, they did some recording. Now we're talking about people that are either IT students or computer science students. So I'm not just talking about this particular thing where I do the recording and all of that. I'm talking about students who are somewhat familiar with technology coming in. So someone in the group usually can handle the recording, and besides things like Screencast-O-Matic, I don't know if you guys have used those, or like PowerPoint. It has like insert, and you can insert a screen recording. So somebody could be recording and then submitting, and I just needed one submission from the group. So you'd have 5 people in the group, and I would have the grade then for the TA or for myself. By the way, I don't have a TA. I just recommend one. Okay. So this is work groups. I told you about the hacking. So I also told you about what I did to avoid the hacking the next time through. I don't recommend you share your Google Calendar with edit rights to get them to put their addresses onto a spreadsheet, okay? Okay, so that was my highlight for groups. If you want to do group work, now if you wanted to do a coding lab, the way I do my coding labs, actually, we in Crookston then were on campus. And when we went to go online, I had students say—
Can I just hold you for just a second? Victor's got a question, so I'm going to go ahead and go to him.
Sure, this is a great break.
Yeah, I was just curious, how many students are in the class, and do you think that's important? Because I could see a class of 10 and a class of 200 being very different.
For the work groups, I did it, actually, I combined 2 classes, so it was about 60. I had an online class of about 25 to 30 and an on-campus class of about 25 to 30. So that's where my grading, where I start mentioning TAs. My understanding is across the university, the more students you have, the more TAs you have, or you're able to have TAs. So been very upfront with that. I think to run a lab well online, you should break them into groups of 3 to 5 and have TAs help you with this grading stuff, and even TAs being available for the next things that I'm going to be talking about. I found this to be time intensive, even with classes of only 25 to 30 students. I hope that answers your question, Victor. Definitely don't do it without help on a larger class, but it can be done, and you're doing the same kind of thing. I would say I would preliminarily break them into maybe smaller groups for the calendar activity, because you can't put 200 students' data on there, you know, so break them into groups as if you had like 25 to 30 in a group, and do them it's the same, follow the same thing. That's my idea. I did do 60 of them on the calendar, because throughout the week, you know, if you had 10 of them in a block, it wasn't the end of the world. But I wouldn't probably go higher than that per grouping. Okay, this next one is the Zoom, and I'm going to follow along the same kind of idea, because I think that the Zoom and the Flipgrids and the Screencast-O-Matic, but especially the Zoom, probably would be better handled in a smaller group as well. So right now I'm running a group of about 25 students. On the Zoom option, I'll share with you next. Okay, so if you have a large group, I recommend you break it into different bits. How many of you guys have used Flipgrid? Can I just like see a little hand or anything like that? Okay, a few of you have used it.
The yes, no's in the participant panel. But go ahead and describe your synchronous Zoom sessions, Christine.
That's the one where when we went to go online, the students in the coding class said, oh, please, 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 please meet with us all the time. I said, okay. So we have Monday, Wednesday, Friday where our class time was. And I have a Zoom session that I've posted in the classroom, so we don't have any Zoom bombing. There's no one really who can access it except people that have access to our class. There have been Zoom bombing accidents in Crookston that have been not so good. So I don't recommend you post them on your public calendar. Do them in the classroom. Okay. So Zoom, then I have a scheduled time. If you want to have office hours, my daughter has an online class where the teacher doesn't have what I'm doing, but has office hours. I do recommend that as well. Have a Zoom available for a certain time. If students log in, that's fine. If not. So what do? I actually have discussions of coding. Instead of doing a lecture, what I do is I pull the coding out, and during the Zoom sessions, I work my way through my material that is basically coding. So it would be the more interactive portions of my class. And one of those 3 days a week is scheduled specifically for just coding questions. So I have 2 days when I talk through coding as I would, and they can interact with me. And once again, I wouldn't recommend a group of over 20, 25. If you can do smaller groups even, that's way better. Because the students won't be talking then, and pretty soon they'll be not engaged. So Zoom, I use breakout rooms, and I did little things like, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. You've got 5-10 minutes in your breakout room, 20 minutes, whatever, to do this particular task. And then I would go through the breakout rooms, and someone would explain, and they would do a screen share. So Zoom offered me a way to meet face-to-face with my students and in groups. And that coding lab, people are like, well, do people actually come when you have optional? Yeah, every week. I have people come to the optional days. I haven't missed an optional day yet. I open up the Zoom meeting and I have several students there. So it might not be the entire class, but it's optional. It's online. I'm scheduling at a certain time. I've got to look at it like that too. So that's my Zoom.
And then Christy, you do one more, and then I'm going to turn to Marta if that's all right.
Yep. That's just what I had said. It's just on here. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I talked through my slides before when I do a Flipgrid, I actually do a recording. Is the last thing I'll share, like a Screencast-O-Matic, which is available off IT, off the U of M. And so they can do a picture-in-picture recording where you see them. That gives you a way to validate who's doing the talking. And they can show you whatever's on their screen, save it, And then I upload it to Flipgrid, and then that gives me a way for the students to view each other's work. And if you're not familiar with any of these things, I actually have video instructions. There are instructions on IT on the U of M. You can search for things. Flipgrid's also got some great things online where the instructions I found to be very good. So Flipgrid it's a lovely way to look at someone's recording, and you can say, I only want 5 minutes. I have those students that do 20. If I let them, right? Instead, it'll cut them off after 5. So that also makes your grading more manageable. You can cut off after 3 or 1. I'm going to stop sharing.
Do we have any quick questions for Christine? We can get into like deep questions about kind of pros, cons versus different approaches, but any quick questions?
There is one about recording to Flipgrid.
Yeah.
I use a recording to Flipgrid for something else. Screencast-O-Matic catches their screen and a picture-in-picture, and Flipgrid catches themselves talking. I haven't been able to flip that around where they can catch their screen with a picture-in-picture on Flipgrid. So that's why I've had to do 2 steps.
Because you're asking them to submit work of them coding.
Yes. Anything where they have to show themselves with something is where I've gone to that extra, save it as an MP4 basically, but do a screen recording.
Cool. Thank you so much, Christine, so far. And then we'll have you on tap. I also just want to kind of bring a different, another option. So Christine's talked about 2 options, which I think are a really great way to think about programming that we can dig into. One is setting up student groups. So students can, continue to work offline on lab assignments in independent groups. You've also talked about kind of some synchronous options, which I think some folks in this session also can probably chime in on, since a lot of folks went that way this semester. And then I also wanted to just have Marta talk a little bit about another asynchronous option for doing labs that she and a colleague, Laura Lay, have been trying out in Biostat. And I know she has to run to another meeting, so I want to make sure to get to.
Before I get started, I just want to warn you that I thought it was a really good idea to buy an open floor concept house, but with 2 children in school and a spouse who's also working virtually, it's not the quietest situation. So we might get interruptions. I'm just warning you in advance. Hopefully they will not involve anything untoward. I do have teenagers. All right, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to talk through some of the things we do. My colleague, Laura, my department, School of Public Health, requires all core courses be offered in person and online. And our attempt over the past couple of years is to make them as similar as possible. I teach an introductory biostat class that's available to people in the School of Public Health, and outside of it, they're all grad students. And what we do is we have actually a document where we talk about the goal of the lab, and we all work with the same data set. We give the exact code they're supposed to type into R. We give a lot of explanations. So it's almost like a book for coding each week with the particular lesson of interest. So there's a lot, and a lot of additional references, as you can see here at the end. And then we ask questions. We ask them to actually understand and interpret the output they have. And then we give at the end, we give some challenge questions where they are supposed to try the labs with different variables in the same data set. And we give a quiz at the end of each week, and there's a question about these guided questions on the quiz each week to try to encourage them to do it. But the main way we learn how to code and we get feedback on code is we basically every week we have a problem set, and then rather than them turning in the problem set and us grading it and getting it back to them a week later, we have the class create their own answer key for the problem set online in a Google Doc. And so right here is an example of a collaborative key. And it is about more than just the coding. It is about more than just the software. But as you can see here, we do ask them to code something in their software and post it and post their output. And then, as you can see here, what's really great about this collaborative key is it's open for maybe 3 or 4 days. So, and students are all supposed to come in and ask and contribute. And what often happens is that a student will come in and will make a comment like this student did here, and then potentially offer other code and other graphs to work off of, or students will potentially, and here's another student coming in with another graph to work off of. And so it actually works. And then what I also do is I have a TA go in every night and I go in every day and we guide it. We don't tell them the answers, but we guide it. If we see that they've set some coding up wrong, we'll say, wait a minute, I thought the coding was supposed to, let's remember how this code's supposed to work. Can someone else maybe correct that error for us? And we try to be as positive and create a really positive community. And our students love these. They love these because there's no pressure about like, what's the right answer? Someone can say something like, I think I had a typo here. And someone else will feed back and say, I was like, yep, thank you for telling me. I checked my table and fixed it. You know, it gets to the end of the semester, they're helping each other code and we're just observing, which is super powerful. And it's really great for creating communities online as well as for teaching the material. And again, it is guided. The yellow highlighting is a TA or is me coming in to encourage things, make some suggestions. And so it's not like a Wild West free-for-all there. It is monitored by us. But it is really great because you see people trying different things, trying out different code, trying and giving each other feedback, and we're all monitoring it to make sure they're doing the right thing. And the big assessment we do for these graduate students is we give them data and we're like, here's the question you have to answer, go. And they have to write a report, and they do really, really well because in part because they see the process of working through code and bouncing ideas of code off of each other in these collaborative keys. And I will point out that in fall, this collaborative key is from a class I had last fall that had over 100 students in it. So it is possible. I mean, we had 2 collaborative keys because we teach 2 different types of software, but it is possible to create these. I say I spend maybe a half hour a day when they're open, checking them and giving feedback, half hour to an hour. You can create more than one of these. So I find they're really just amazing ways for students to try out coding and not feel pressure to have the right answer and get feedback from each other as well as from the teachers. The second course, Biostatistics 2, is having them do a collaborative key. And then that collaborative key closes on Saturday. And then on Sunday, they're supposed to submit a report. And almost always it's just changing one variable. Everything else in the coding is the same. But they just want, the instructor for Biostat 2 just wants to make sure everyone does all the coding. So has them also submit a short report. So I think that would be better for undergrads because I think grad students tend to be kind of more motivated without points attached to it. I mean, we have points for participation in this, just to make sure everyone participates. But I used to teach undergrads and I know points for participation often means doesn't work the same way as for grad students. So you can do this collaborative key for a problem set during the week and then have them turn something in after that's actually graded for content. But what I really like about this is it gives students space to come in when they have time. It gives us a way to give them feedback, but it also gives them a way to help each other. And feedback from the classes, both online and in person, students almost uniformly praise these. They say they found it was a really good for learning how to code. So,
Can I ask you a quick question?
yep.
And you mentioned this a little bit, but what are the requirements for your students? Do they have to come in and participate? And then does your TA just note that someone's contributed something and then they like get
Oh,
the
I will
point?
go
Or
ahead
how
and
does that
show
work?
you what I do. When we have the link where you can view, anyone at the University of Minnesota can view, and then you change it to edit, and then we turn it back to view. And then when it's done and I've turned it back to view so students can no longer edit, all I did was let me go back. I clicked on this, let's wait for the error message, this last edit you made, and it will show you all the edits. And then I just have a list of my registration, and I check. I go down, it's in alphabetical order, and I find the name and I check that they've participated. I do also encourage them, I don't tell them that's how I grade it, I encourage them in it to actually list their first and last name at the start of their comment, and every student to use a different color if possible, so that you can tell who's done what, where, and you can talk to each other. But when I grade, I really honestly just go and make sure that they've logged on and contributed something.
Thanks so much. So these are kind of two, some distinct ways and also some synchronous. And so I kind of want to turn it over to broader
Can I
questions.
say one thing that you didn't
Yeah.
ask me to point out, but I just wanted to point out? I'm teaching advanced programming in R, and it was really hard to switch to asynchronous this semester, but I found this website called DataCamp, and you can set up classrooms in DataCamp and assign chapters, or assign them to get a certain number of experience points, or assign projects in DataCamp to students. And what's really beautiful about these DataCamp modules is they'll have someone explain something, and then they'll give you partially filled out code, and you have to fill it in, and you can't go to the next step until you get the coding right. So if you're teaching like Python, R, some of these other things, this is a really great resource for kind of a semi-interactive thing students can practice on before they do a homework. That's all I had to say.
That was a good bonus, guys.
I just wanted to share
glad.
it. And it's, you register it as a class, and then you give a link to like proof that you're actually a teacher, and you get it all for free. All the courses for free.
Cool.
So that's all I had to say.
Oh, thank you. And then do you mind just unsharing your screen? Cool. And then I'm going to just kind of turn it over to the folks in the room. What questions or challenges are you encountering, or what kinds of questions as you think about how you might set up your programming labs for a maybe fully online environment? And you can either raise your hand, just unmute yourself, be polite, or type it into the chat. Christopher is wondering if DataCamp costs any money, Marta?
DataCamp, if you go in and say you're an instructor at a university and you provide evidence, like a link to some web page where you're mentioned as an instructor, you can set it up as a classroom for free for the duration of your course. So that, what I showed you is all completely free. All those assignments were free for me to set up, but they end May 13th, and then students can't access them.
Awesome. Go ahead, Christopher Kaufman.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. I just wanted to ask about this idea of forming community in online-only courses. My primary experience has been with in-person, and several of us in the computer science department were discussing this aspect of the transition in the spring. We benefited a lot from students had met in person leading into the transition, so they'd already formed some friendships and some collaborations and so forth. But teaching this summer and then next fall, if we're completely online, I'm concerned about how we can form that kind of community and connections. Christine mentioned it, and I was just curious if others have ideas about how to do this effectively when you never meet in person off the bat.
Is this open for answering, or? Yes, okay. So
yes, as I'm totally muted, I'm like, yes, but actually when I'm telling you, go for it.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a CFAN's AT, but I'm also an instructor at the Center for Spirituality and Healing. I actually teach an online course about community. So what I will tell you is that you have to utilize every single tool almost that's available in Canvas, but there are tons. The group tool, the collaboration tool, integrating your Zoom sessions, using Flipgrid, using VoiceThread, and making sure you're present start off your week with a video where you talk to them about things that are happening. So building community through online presence and a clear communication strategy, like when you're gonna talk to them, when they're gonna talk to each other, and what tools are gonna be used to do that, help. And you can create community when people have never met, but it's got to be super intentional from the first day. So that would be my quick advice.
Sarah, can you tell us a little bit just about what are some of the activities you have students engage with to get to know each other in a way that's relevant to the course setting and feels maybe, you know, it's not like, hey, do you have a dog? Although that can be really useful. It's also what kinds of questions do you have that help them engage as a community of scholars or community of colleagues?
Actually integrating collaborative things into assignments, making things either interviews. Using Flipgrid is great for interview questions and personal response questions, and engaging in debate, where a student, you say your initial post, you're going to talk about the maybe the journal article we just read, and what are the 3 points that you really resonated with you and why. And then you will go to a peer and you will reply directly to them about why you disagree with them or why you agree with them, depending on the thing. And then you can do that many layers and have those two really get to know each other. Or you can arrange groups to have simultaneously Zoom sessions. Or you can also use even collaborative documents where they're not necessarily seeing each other, but I'll have them create a document on community best practices, and they'll meet in real time and create that document as they write through Google Docs. So just utilizing tools that have a distinct assignment or purpose behind them that ask them to use the materials presented for that week or topic in a meaningful and intentional way.
Do others have ideas? And I'll let Sarah jump in, and then I think I saw Christine maybe.
I was just going to say, my name's Sarah Shane and I work for Academic Technology Support Services, and I also teach a class in the leadership minor and do many of the same things that Sarah also just mentioned. But my suggestion is also from the beginning of class, in your first video, communication, whatever you put out there, let students know that this is not an independent study class that you're doing, that you let them know right off the bat that you want them interacting, you're going to be doing group work, you're expecting them to interact as part of your expectations for how they're going to learn from one another and learn from you. And then also scaffold, you know, when you first, be sure to spend time in those first couple weeks developing that, you know, putting that out there, having them, you know, either it's Flipgrids for the whole class or put them in small groups or partners and one-on-one, and giving them opportunities to get to know each other while they're also doing a little bit of low stakes work that aren't hugely high stakes work, so they can spend that get to know you time while also, you know, learning a little bit about how they can work together.
One suggestion that I'd add to that, I'm Dan Embry, I work in the Writing Enriched curriculum. It's great to offer opportunities for folks to create their own profile in a way that is more writing or literate intensive, in addition to something that's on video, especially because of technology differences that exist all over the place. So something like, you know, who you are, what year you are, what motivates you to take the course, that might be an effective icebreaker that's really low stakes without necessarily incorporating any challenges to how people might want to represent themselves or display themselves. It's just something to think about. Ideally, all our communities will share across a variety of different platforms, but just as an opener, that might be a gentle way to get into a conversation before people have to worry about the fact that they haven't had a haircut for a couple of months or whatever it might be.
Awesome. I'm going to go to Victor next.
Okay, thanks. So I had a thought. So I'm going to teach a fairly large class, meaning 2 sections, 50 to 60 kids each. And I need to get them into groups. I think I'm willing to have slightly larger groups, let's say 5 or 6. And normally I just, you know, it's where the students sit. But that's obviously impossible. And I could assign them randomly. but I wonder, I actually had a group last year in my class that as a project, they wrote a Gail Shapley matching algorithm for study buddies. You know, what do you like to do? When do you like to work? And then they match everybody up and they produce the stable pairs of study buddies. And I wonder if you could do something like that. Do you have a dog? Do you, you know, and try to get people who would have sort of natural connections. It wouldn't be ideal, but, you know, and I wonder if people have done things like that or have thought about that or what they think to try to put people into groups together. Like, say, if you have a group of people you like and you already work well with, great. But a large fraction of my class, they don't know each other coming in. And then the idea would be, you know, could you do that? And I just would be interested to hear what people say.
Thoughts? You can unmute or raise your hand. I see Anne. Is that on this topic or a new one? I'll hold you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Okay. It was on a new one, so I'll let you jump to somebody else and
Very
then.
cool. Thoughts for Victor on setting up groups or what the parameters could be?
I like the idea of Flipgrid with that. I also like Daniel Emery's for those students that don't want to use the face-to-face. We've had some students with, they can't be face-to-face for, they have a hidden identity for some reason. So Flipgrid and video has been an issue for some of my students in my classes for security reasons. So just always keeping that in mind is important. I like the idea of an icebreaker though, that first week or two to try and get to know each other.
Yeah. And I think, Victor, in terms of setting up groups based on interests, I think that if you've got the bandwidth for managing how to put those groups together or that works out. In my experience in looking through the literature on group formation, the most often important aspect is the one that Christine is controlling for, which is availability. Availability to meet at the same time, to be able to look at the same code at the same time. I know from talking to Victor before this one started that he has a course where typically the class time is often used for small group activity. And he's wondering if he has to abandon those in the online space. And that was one of the questions that came up in the registration form from a few of you. And the answer is no. You can do you could do a synchronous Zoom session and continue to have those. You need to be real mindful, especially if we're still doing this in fall, of time zones and things like that. But you can use breakout rooms to put students into groups. My big advice there, and maybe others have some suggestions about this, is to think about where the instructions for the activity are. So if we're in this big Zoom session and I start a breakout and I'm sharing my slides and they've got the instructions for the activity on them, and then I put you all in breakout rooms, you can't see my slides anymore, which means the instructions are now lost for the activity. And so what we do at CEI for our workshops where we do this kind of thing is we have a workbook or a Google Doc or the slides available where the instructions for the activity live and the students know, and then you tell them to go there and have them open at the start of class. And then when you put them into breakout rooms, guide them to we're on activity number 1. We're now shifting to activity number 2, look at the prompts and that kind of thing. So that again, they know where the instructions are, what they'll be expected to report back on, and approximately how much time. Do others have thoughts on that?
That sounds like a very useful thing to do. Like,
and one of the other things that comes up a lot for synchronous things in spaces like this one that I would love to hear folks' perspectives on as well is how to continue to share pieces of paper or shared code that often, debugging was something that came up in the registration question, where often what's going on in lab is shared debugging. And I was wondering if folks have ways in which they manage that kind of stuff, or I know for those who were looking for paper, logging in with a secondary device into Zoom and then MacGyvering a solution to hold your phone. I've heard rulers on a set of cardboard boxes with some chip clips actually works reasonably well from some mechanical engineers. So, but are there other ways that folks think about or have had success with sharing kind of joint materials with students in this space, which is often a common part of labs?
I just like to say Zoom and breakout rooms and shared screens for us works really well because we are coding ourselves. We have it on our computer. So all of the tools are right there for the students. Breakout rooms give them that small, and we like them a lot. It's very positive.
Cool.
One technique I found is you want students to be able to copy paste from one area to the next with some of the coding thing, because that does avoid like the typos and a lot of the debugging. So we used to just send like 100-slide PowerPoint in advance, so we wouldn't have to screen share. Would we now copy the text from slide 43 into this command and label it with this find me sort of tag. So I think just obviously that doesn't deal with the paper, like the physical paper situation. But I think just making sure they have copies of everything they can in advance and that they can look at something on their own screen rather than you sharing your screen with them when possible. I think for a coding specific class, that could perhaps be helpful.
Okay. Awesome. And then
I'm
one,
going to take advantage of the silence to,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to take advantage of the silence to follow up on my chat question, which is, if I have everybody in a bunch of breakout rooms, can I pop them all out on Moss back into the main room? And then can I send them all back down on Moss into theirs, and they go to the same breakout rooms they were already in?
Mm-hmm.
And so how does that work?
The short answer is there's a button at the bottom when you're the host, and it says breakout rooms, and you say make breakout rooms, and it'll ask you how many you want. And this sets up random groups just the way that you described. If you want pre-assigned groups, you can set those up. Some people have had more trouble with those, but for your random groups, as you described, you can just do that. You set them in. When you want it to be over, you say end the breakout. It gives them a 60-second warning, and they can come back early, but then it kicks them out of their breakout.
If I want to send them back in,
you just
hit
the
breakout and they go back into the same rooms they were in before.
Yes.
And I can preset them if I want to.
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to comment on that because I've had some experience of the breakout rooms in a class of 68 this year. When you randomly assign them at the beginning of class to go out really easy, it's really easy to manage. You will have students who drop out. They have an internet blip and they won't go back into the rooms, but that'll show up at the top of the list of breakout rooms that there's an unassigned person, and you ask them, do you remember what group you were in or who you were with, and you can put them back in the same group or put them in a different one. If you want to pre-assign, I have not done that because when we were researching it, we wanted to do that because we had study groups established when we were face-to-face before COVID. And we wanted to maintain those groups, but we would have had to have had all of our students establish Zoom IDs. You have to have a Zoom ID. Every student has to have a Zoom account for you to pre-assign. So if we were doing this at the beginning of class, at the beginning of a semester, that would be part of our startup procedure, but things were in such upheaval with COVID, we didn't require that.
And could you just set up a bunch of rooms and let the students assign themselves?
No.
They can't do that.
No, you just say how many rooms you want and then tell it to manually, tell them to automatically assign people. So as a class of 68, I said 10 rooms because that gives me 6 to 7 a room. And then I'd send them out to discuss and do their problem solving. And then you just close the rooms and open the rooms and they come back to the main area versus going out.
Right, but if I wanted to let the students pick their own rooms, could I do that?
No, not unless they did before the class started. So, and then you would pre-assign them, but you couldn't do spontaneous student chosen groups.
Okay, so I would have, if I want them to be in a specific set of rooms, I have to assign them myself. I can't just say, okay, your group is room 1, go into it now.
Yes.
I have to tell them, I have to assign them myself.
So at the beginning of the semester, you make sure that they all have Zoom accounts. You make sure you know what their Zoom ID is, and then you can upload a document that I think it's Excel, probably. You have it in Excel or something, and you can just upload the template that tells which room each student belongs to.
Great. I'm going to go to Jeffrey Applin, to Jeff Applin.
Well, I just had a response to Carolyn. I believe it's the case that you can put names and email addresses in a comma delimited Excel file and pre-assign students.
Have you done that, Jeff? We tried that and it didn't work. And
yeah,
when
I've been doing it all term.
What's that?
I've been doing that all term. Yeah, if you've downloaded a roster of registered students, you get all of the data you need to create this. There is a specific format. You have to use certain headers, but you just need a column with the name and a column with the email address. And it's quite easy.
Okay, then we were given misinformation. Thanks.
And it looks like Sarah linked to the documentation from IT, so I'll also direct you there if it also describes how to set this up.
Yeah,
So,
the difficulty is I can't copy from chat into a browser.
oh, serious. That's one of those new security features. It's protecting us all. I'll make sure that all of these
I just did it.
Okay, we should be able to copy, but if you can't, they will all be in the notes that you'll get in about a week. If you, but otherwise, I can make sure that it gets emailed to you as well. Are there other questions here? Things that people are thinking about as they're considering what their labs might look like and how they might meet the learning objectives for their course?
Just really quick on that Zoom. As an instructor, I pop in and out of the breakout rooms, and I can do that. It's really a nice way to touch base with the different groups and make sure everything's going well.
Yeah, and I've seen people really effectively do some of their same practices from class where they pop into different groups, see something interesting, and then say, hey, would you be willing to share your screen when we come back as a large group to show everyone your code? I'll go to Christopher Kaufman.
Hey, one other question that has come up that's sort of been in and out, but what sort of percentage is it right to think of as synchronous versus asynchronous parts of the course? For instance, right now, I'm just settled on something where I record YouTube videos, but then during normal lecture times, I'm available for Q&A. Do folks have comments on what they have seen through experiences more or less effective and how to combine those two parts of it?
Oh, and Christopher, you're going to be asking a really interesting question because our current situation of having scheduled synchronous time while teaching an online course is a completely unique situation that is resulting from COVID. But I'll turn to Christine.
I think it varies for me by material. So some courses are better suited for one and another. I don't think the recipe for what works well for every class like this. It's based on, like, my coding classes need different than my classes that are primarily a book learning class. So I would say it's less face-to-face time with a class that, dare I say, is less challenging. I find that coding has more variables to the lesson than some of my other classes that are non-coding. So I think the higher the number of variables for learning, the higher teacher interaction needs to be.
So more face-to-face opportunities, the more there's opportunity for application or higher order learning.
For me, for someone, a TA for work groups, I think the students need more contact with the larger variables of learning.
Yeah. And then one of the questions that came up in the registration is just in this online format, how are folks getting files back and forth, and are there any particular considerations about providing coding files that are particular to teaching in an online space versus your in-person space? My gut was that they were very similar, but given that there was a question, I thought I might be missing something.
The only thing I can say on that is the screen share. I use links. I put them on my Canvas site, like a link to a document if I need to. And I do a lot of Google shares for the presentations or for the materials. And if I need group work, they'll do a Google presentation or a Google Word doc, and they'll be sharing that together as a group. I do provide instructions on how to do whatever it is, Screencast-O-Matic or whatever. I always provide the video instructions for that. But Google Docs are really handy.
Great.
I know I talk a lot, so if anybody else has something, I'd really love to hear what everyone else says.
Are there any other questions here? I've got a couple of other points of business. Great. So what I would love to do now, I'm going to launch a poll, is that this group teaches very similar things. And so I'm wondering if you would like to continue to connect with this group. You can select as many of these options, launch, as you'd like. But basically, do you want to have another discussion or Q&A with this particular group? Would you like to set up a Google group or a listserv to exchange ideas, resources, ask questions as we go through the next few months? Or no, I don't need any of that, but thank you for offering. And if you are interested in that listserv, I'll make sure that this group that I set one up and it gets added to it. Okay, it looks like a lot of people are really interested in that. I'll definitely set it up, and I will leave it to you all to help monitor and to ask those questions. And I'd really encourage you to lean on each other. We actually have folks in this session from across our whole system, and there's a lot of rich experience that we're all that we have and that we can gain as well. And then finally, I'm gonna put in the chat a link, and I know some of you can't copy these out, so it's z.umn.edu/virtual4. And we'd love to get feedback on how these sessions are. We're running a lot of these right now, and we may be running more of them over the summer. And so we'd appreciate your feedback on how we're doing with facilitating these and with setting them up in a way that's useful to you. So that's the link, z.umn.edu/virtual4. I'll stick around, and I'm more than happy to stay with those who are willing to answer some more questions. And just wanted to say thank you for both all the work that you have been doing and for all the work that you will be doing. I know that this is a challenging time, and a lot of us are teaching in ways that are very unfamiliar. So have a great afternoon.